I got paper. So by now, if you know anything about me, you know the most exciting art product I could have is paper. I love paper. Let me tell you a quick story. Someone asked me when I did the review of the Hahnemuehle 100% cotton book. Well, someone said to me, hey, do you think they have samples that they'll send out of the paper that's in that book? I said, I don't know. Let me find out. So I contacted them, and very nice people got back in touch with me, and they said, I'm sorry, we don't do that. But we have other paper that we can send to you to try out. So they did. I didn't even ask for it. They just sent it to me. So disclaimer, I hate when people do this. Listen, if you don't think I'm being honest with you, me saying the word disclaimer, that shouldn't do anything for it. It doesn't automatically, oh, he said disclaimer. He must be telling the truth now. No, if I was lying to you, I'd be lying to you. So disclaimer, they sent me some paper. They're not paying for this video. No one pays me for anything. Maybe I'm going to send this video to them. Maybe they'll think about it after that, but they're not right now. So I have some paper here. I'm going to do some testing of this paper and try and destroy it. They sent me quite a lot to try and destroy. I'm going to give it my best. So this first one, this is the Expression. Now the Expression paper is supposed to be like the top of the line, best grade paper you can get from the company, from what I understand from the material. It's supposed to be resistant to all kind of erasing, and any kind of tape or masking fluid you put on isn't supposed to stick. No residue is supposed to be left over after you pull it off. We're going to put that to the test for sure. I have several pieces of that paper. We'll test it. Now that's 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. That's the Expression one that they sent me. So that's what I'm going to test. One thing that I like about their paper is it's white. It's not off-white cream colored. I love Arch's paper. It's just not, I don't use it because I like the stark contrast sometimes. I like the ultra white paper. And then they sent me some papers from the collection. It looks like this. If you go online, it's going to have the black border on top and bottom, almost like a cinematic movie. Not like what I do here, but it's going to have that with some color in the middle, and they have all the different kinds, the hot press, cold press, rough. They have them in all different things. What they sent me was, I have hot press paper, 300-pound hot press paper. Now, if you've ever heard me talk about 300-pound paper, that's my favorite paper to use. Even if I was drawing on it with the ink or something, 300-pound, that's the way to do it. Listen to this. You can't do that with paper. They're boards. That's what they are. Just about boards. That's about it. But this is 300-pound of the hot press paper. That's great. I love, and the texture of this, I want to mention this first. The texture of the paper is, it's not like a Bristol plate or anything like that. It's not even like a Bristol vellum. It's a fine grain, but it's got a little bit more texture than that. So in theory, what that should do is soften some of the edges when you put the watercolor on it. Not have such a hard edge when you put down that watercolor. A lot of hot press paper, you put it on there, and there's a hard edge on it. That's just how it is. You have to work at it to blend it out. This one shouldn't have that. It's a little bit more textured. It's still hot press. You could probably run a pen across it, which I will test. We'll run a pen across it, and it shouldn't skip. It's just fine. But just letting you know, it might help when you're trying to do something. If you're someone who doesn't use the hot press because you're afraid of the hard edges, this may be your answer to that. And then some of my favorite paper. See, I love the hot press for the smooth pen and ink drawings, and then I love the rough paper. The rough paper is one of my favorite things to use for watercolor. And they sent me some 140-pound rough paper, and they sent me a couple of sheets of the 300-pound. You hear that? That's 300-pound watercolor paper, rough press. That's something that I have not seen very often. I have not purchased any. I don't think I've ever used the rough 300-pound watercolor paper, but now I'm going to get to try it. So I'm going to test it. I'm not going to do, listen, I'm not going to do the standard YouTuber artist thing when they test papers and they make little boxes and they sprinkle salt on it. I'm not trying to make my art savory. I just want it to be interesting, that's all. So I'm not doing that. I'm going to use some tape around the border because I like to do that, make a little picture frame-esque kind of thing. I'll do that on there just to test that. I'll use some masking fluid on them, and I'm just going to draw some abstract stuff on there and paint some abstract pieces on them and just see how they hold up. Now, when I spoke to them, I asked if it was double-sided or single-sided paper, and they assured me some people use both sides, that's possible to do. There's some companies you have to use the front. The back side has no sizing on it or something. They don't put it in the mix. And there's different ways that companies do that. Sometimes they put it in the formula of the paper. Sometimes they put it on top. Sometimes they do both. But they assured me some people use the front and back of the paper. On these other pages, I can't do that. There's a lot of stuff back here. So I can't really, can you see there's a lot of writing on the back of this. So I'm going to have to only use the front and just fill in this little section here. However, on the expression paper, there's only writing on one side. So this side seems more textured, so I'm going to do something on this side. And I'm also going to use the back because although it's not, I believe this is the back of the paper. The way that the texture is, I think it is, but it's just hard to tell sometimes. I think it is. I'm still going to try something on the back of it and see if that works as well. So I did mention that I'm going to send them the link to this video. Here's what we want. Hahnemuehle, if you are listening to me, we would like some rumors. You know, it doesn't matter what you do here on YouTube. You see people with cameras and music equipment and TVs and all these different technologies, phones, and everybody, they leak little things. Oh, this is coming down the pike. We might be able to offer this soon, and people are waiting like, oh, they get all hyped up about stuff. Artists like to get hyped up too. We would like to know if you have anything coming down the line that maybe we should be getting ready for. Maybe you have a new kind of book coming out or a new type of paper you're going into. I don't see how you have so many different types of paper on your site, but if you are, please let us know because we'd like to get excited about it. And then maybe in 6 months or so, we get disappointed it didn't get released. That's happened with other companies. But there's not a whole lot of rumors for us to deal with, and we would like some. So if you have any, go ahead and send them my way. I'll share them with everybody here, and we can get excited about what's coming. All right, I'm going to be as tough as I can on this paper, so let's get into it. All right, so we're going to start off with the Expression, which is the cold press watercolor paper. It's the 140 pound. Now, I want to point something out. I do not use masking tape. I use painter's tape. Now, when I test these papers, I'm not testing them the way that you might use them. I'm testing them to make sure that they will hold up the way that I use them. So I'm just going to do what I normally do. And the first thing I'm going to do is one of these fibrous kind of abstract pieces that I usually do. It's not wonderful, but it's not really a test of the piece. It's really just to test the paper. And I go over a couple times with some layers, and we'll see how it holds up. And spoiler alert, it does hold up. And the tape is not bad. I'll show you at the end. And then at the very end of the video, I forgot to do the masking fluid here, but I will do the masking fluid on this paper at the very end of the video. I'll just do a quick little recap of that. Or I might just include it here at the end of this section just for the heck of it, because I do, and I test the back of the paper too. Now, I don't know if the backs of these papers are the same way that you'd get them from if you bought them from them, because all of the backs of the papers are actually quite smooth. Even on the rough watercolor paper, the back is very smooth. Now on the Expression paper, this is supposed to be the toughest stuff they have, and on the Expression paper, the back is more like the back of a cold press paper. You do see a little bit more of that texture in there. But even the rough paper, like I said, has like a smooth back to it. And I don't know if that's the way that you would always get it. If it is, that's great, because you can bind it in your own. Oh, we'll get to that later. So anyway, this paper worked out great. I did really enjoy it. And some of the things that I will say that I enjoyed about it was even though it's supposed to be cold pressed watercolor paper, the texture isn't too bad. It's not too much. I could draw with a pen on this very smoothly. It didn't skip around. It was fine, but it has enough texture to do its job, which is to make sure that the watercolor acts like it's on cold pressed watercolor paper. And one of the differences that you'll see is on watercolor paper that's cold pressed, the edges are softer on the actual painting. You can see where the edge, it kind of just blends out nicely. It's like a soft transition from the watercolor to the blank paper. Whereas if you go with regular like hot press, you tend to find a harder edge with that. So now this is a nice paper. I didn't have a lot of issues with it. It worked exactly the way that I would want my cold pressed watercolor paper to act. It held on to the color well. It was actually, when I went over some areas, you can tell that you could easily lift as well. So it seems like a paper that I didn't do a lift test on these things because I don't usually do a lot of lifting. That's not how I use watercolor paper. If I was going to do some lifting, that might be a little different, but I usually don't do that. But from going over a spot, you know, if you go down with some watercolor paper, you put it down and then you let it dry just a little bit and then you go back over it and it reactivates, or does it give you like a harsh line that you can't reactivate? Well, when I did, it had no problem reactivating. When I went over, I just went over a couple little areas multiple times that just with some extra color, and it didn't have that hard edge to it. It softened right up and blended right into what I was putting on top of it. So this paper seems like it would be good for lifting, which conversely means if you like to put the detail down first and then go over it with a wash and not have the details move, I don't know if it would do that. I think it might move the watercolor underneath. You'll have to test that. So people can tell you if the paper itself is going to be good for a certain technique, but they can't tell you if it's good for the way that you do art. You're going to have to figure that out for yourself. But again, I didn't test. Now, I'm just going to mention this as well. I am not one of those people that go ahead and tell you right away, I've used the paper for 15 minutes and I tell you it's the greatest thing in the world. I'm not going to do that either because I don't know. This is not a long-term review. This is an initial review of the paper just based on what I normally do. And this is the kind of information I'm going to give you. It may vary. Later on, I may say, oh, no, I noticed this thing might be a little bit annoying. Or this might be a benefit that I didn't notice in the beginning. That could always happen. But I'm saying for the first time that I started using it, it seems very nice. It seems like a good cold pressed watercolor paper. It holds up very well and acts exactly the way that I would think a good cold pressed watercolor paper will act. Now I am going to do 3 completely different types of art on all 3 of these papers. So I'm not going to go ahead and go to the next one and just do the same kind of thing. You'll see 3 completely different kinds of pieces. Okay, so now I'm starting to take off the tape. You can see it. Very little bit of fuzz, nothing really at all. There's a couple little spots, but nothing that it would ever raise an alarm. I wouldn't hesitate to use this paper and sell it to someone as a finished work. Nothing at all. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the back of this paper a little bit. You'll see it works just fine. It's a little different. It feels a little different, but the texture is different. That's the back of the paper. It doesn't feel like there's any difference in the sizing or anything like that. It works just fine. But I would say that I would use the front side of it for a finished piece. If I had it in a sketchbook, if you bind your own sketchbooks, you could use front and back. It's not a big deal. I would not hesitate to do that. And it gets a thumbs up there. So now I just want to show you the back of the page. It did buckle a little bit. You can see some buckling in that. You can probably see it in the video okay. It's not terrible. If I was holding the piece in my hand, I would barely feel it. You can't really feel it. You can see it a little bit better because there's color on the back of it. But it's not really bad at all. I, again, would not hesitate to use this as a finished piece and sell it to someone. It's not terrible, and the warping of the page itself is virtually nothing. There's nothing really there. And my opinion is, in their 100% cotton watercolor book, I like that paper a little bit nicer than I like this one, but just barely. I don't see any of that warping in there. That's the only difference. Okay, here we go. This is the 300-pound rough paper. This is my favorite paper for the whole lot. I'm going to go into why. You know, I compared this next to Arches. I may do... Okay, so it does say the fibers do not lift, rub, or loosen even when applying multiple layers of color when using masking fluids and tapes. So we're going to put that to the test, that's for sure. But like I was saying, I compared this next to Arches, and here's what I found. The texture, Arches is known for being extra rough, and I love extra rough paper, I really do. This one, I saw no difference in texture. It was just as rough, which I absolutely love, and as a bonus, it was bright white. This is my favorite paper that they sent me. I'm spoiling the rest of the video. It doesn't matter, don't worry about that. The point is, this was wonderful. This was a dream to work on compared to other rough press papers that I've had. I'm going to buy a bunch of this and bound my own sketchbook, and then I'm going to bound, did I say bound as past tense? I'm going to bind my own sketchbook and make my own rough watercolor sketchbook out of this paper. I love it that much. And it is a bonus. The back side is very smooth. I didn't do anything on the back of this one because I did the back on the other one. But the back is very smooth. It's almost like a hot press. And so you could, if that's how it comes when you buy the paper, they also have printing on the back. They print on the back, so that may not be true when you actually get it in a pack of paper. They may have done that on purpose, made one side rough and made the other side completely flat so they could print on it. But anyway, if it comes that way, you could put it in a book and you can do a painting on one side. The other side you can do some ink work. You can do some maybe some watercolor pencils or some Inktense pencils or something like that. And do a sketch on one side and do a painting on the other side. You could do that if you want. Or you can just enjoy the glory of the rough press paper. I know that I'm fanboying on this one. This is one of my favorite papers I've ever used. So when I sign my name, it's the only time I used a regular pen. But when I signed my name, no skipping. I was able to take a regular pen and write on this paper, as rough as it is. And I think that's wonderful. It's just a joy to work on. Now, what I did with this is that's a Pentel pocket brush that I used to put the dark black part on there. And this was inspired by, I'm a big fan of praying mantises. It doesn't matter. It's a martial arts thing. But anyway, I like the praying mantis. And so I just made all these praying mantis arm-like tentacle things. That's what it was inspired by. But you'll see, even when I go over the top, I use multiple different white pens. I use two of the Zig, like the Zig brush white pen, and then the Zig with the felt tip brush pen. And the white comes off great on here. It works very nice. You get that splattery look, which I love on this kind of paper. It's more of a just an abstract, like a representational abstract thing anyway. So it doesn't matter. I didn't need a clean line. But when I did need a clean line, you see when I put those little hairs on the mantis arm there, you'll see it's completely clear. It's a clear line. There's no trouble drawing. I used the Posca paint pen, and with the extra fine one, the 1M or something like that. I forget what the number it is, but it doesn't matter. The point is, you can draw fine lines on this paper, as rough as it is, and still get all that texture from the watercolor. I know I'm keep going on about this, but this was absolutely my favorite paper to use. I'm definitely buying this one. Now, if you're a landscape painter, or if you are an abstract landscape painter, and you've never tried 300-pound rough paper, I urge you to do that. Find some and use it. This paper is one of the best for that. Now, I know you don't have to go type in the comments down there. I know I'm being a hypocrite because I just said that I don't use something for 15 minutes and then tell you that you have to use it. But I am telling you, this is great paper. I've used a lot of rough press paper, and I've used very little of the 300-pound rough press paper, but I've used enough rough press paper to know that this is one of the best. It absolutely works exactly the way that I wanted it to, and it's exactly what you'd expect. So I would urge you to, if that's something that you're into, this is the one to try right here. Okay, now here I'm taking the tape off, and you see the same thing. There's a little bit of fuzz on there, but there's not really much. I wouldn't say anything about that. Like I said, it's a rough press paper. It's not going to cause any issues or problems with the paper as you pull it. I know it looks, it's a lot of contrast on this, but it's really not much. It's very little. I did not use the masking fluid on this. Don't worry, I'm going to test this paper some more because I'm going to put this up against the Arches hot press in another, the Arches rough press in another video. I'm going to do a head-to-head on that. But like I said, very little is coming off on that. I would not have a problem with that at all. Usually more, way more comes off when I use any kind of tape on any book. It doesn't matter what I'm using because I use stronger tape. I'm not using regular masking tape. So, okay, now this is the hot press paper, and I have to say this is probably the one that I was the most disappointed in when I used this particular test. I had to test this one twice. I had to do 2 drawings because I put the tape on and then I put the masking fluid. I was going to do the masking fluid on this one. Now, I just want you to know I'm being a little cruel here because hot press paper is notoriously known for not being able to handle a lot of stuff like this. It's just a notorious thing. Most people know that on hot press paper, you usually don't do this. But some people do, and I wanted to test this. So if I was going to test this on anything, this would be the test to do it. And this is the worst case scenario. And you'll see I put down the masking fluid. I put a wash over it, which worked well. The wash worked well. And then I went ahead and peeled the masking fluid off and put another wash in the blank area so that you can see where all the paper was ripped up and torn and what it created. Now don't look at the little tiny dots. Look at the big splotchy areas because that's the areas that it really didn't take it very well. The little dots, even when I started the second painting, and I didn't use any tape on the second painting, I didn't use any masking fluid on the second painting. What happens is it looks like the paper's pilling. That's what it looks like. That's not what's happening here. When you see that, when it dries, all that goes away. It's just because of the texture of the paper. It's smooth. So it looks like it's pilling and little dots everywhere. But when it dries, they're not there. And you'll see that when we go into the second part of this painting. Now, when I do the second painting of it, when I do the second drawing, it works exactly like I would expect a hot press watercolor paper to work. I put a ton of layers on this. It never pilled, it never tore, it never broke the fiber, anything like that. When I did that with the regular, just layers of watercolor over and over, that worked exactly the way I wanted it to. And then the ink was, of course, wonderful on it. It doesn't bleed, it doesn't feather. It's fine. It works just like I would expect it to. And then I was able to take I took an Inktense pencil just to show you. Now, here's another thing. Some hot press papers are a little bit rougher than this one. This one is, and when I say that, I mean that other ones are rougher with the pencil. With this one, it's a little bit rougher, or feels a little bit rougher in texture than like a really, really smooth plate kind of finish. But it's even rougher than a vellum finish. It's a little bit rougher than some hot press papers. But the pencil dissolved completely. I didn't have any like areas where the pencil got in and didn't dissolve properly. Sometimes I find that with hot press papers. Not with this one. It worked just fine. If you are someone that uses masking fluid a lot and someone that uses tape a lot, I would not recommend this paper. That's something I would stay away from. Go to one of their other papers maybe, but not on this one. If you wanted to do something like that, you can even use the cold press paper, and that worked fairly well, and I would recommend using that one instead, and the pen will work just fine on that. But on hot press, if that's what you're really into, I would pass on this one if you're going to use those things. Anything else, it's fine. It works great, just like I would expect from any other quality hot press paper. Now you will see on the bottom right of that second drawing, I smeared some of the ink. I didn't let it dry all the way, and I rubbed my hand over it, and it smeared a little bit. That's not the paper's fault. Some inks dry quicker than others. If you use a fine liner, you have to let that ink dry for a little bit before you introduce some water if you start at first. Or if you're drawing with it, you let it dry for a couple of seconds before you run your hand over it. That's all. It's just common sense. But I didn't, and I just got a little bit on the edge of the paper. It was not a big deal. And what I like hot press paper for is that illustration kind of look that you get from it. there's not a whole lot of texture on the paper. There's no texture on the paper, much that you can see it all through the paint. So when you do something, it's very smooth. It just looks more illustrative. And that's exactly what happened in this piece. It looks more like an illustration from maybe some weird book, like a kid's book, or maybe a little, I don't know, like a fantasy book or something like that. That's what it looked like to me. And I like that effect from hot press paper. So I do like to use it myself. And I don't know, if I wasn't going to, I use tape a lot. That's the thing. I do use tape a lot. But if I wasn't going to use tape and I wasn't going to use masking fluid, which I don't use masking fluid a lot, but I do use tape a lot. So if I'm going to do that, I will not use this paper. But otherwise, I would keep it on my shelf to do, if I know I'm not going to use that tape in there, I would go ahead and use it and just, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with the paper. I love that it's 300-pound paper. That's wonderful. I love heavyweight paper. That's just something I love to create on. And if you were using gouache or something, no problem with that. Gouache you can put on a paper bag. It doesn't matter. But anything you want to put at this, I'm sure it will work fine. Acrylics and things like that, I don't see a problem with it because it sits on top. So anything else I think will be fine. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to go ahead and test this on the cold press, the expression paper. It's on the front side of it with the texture, and I'm putting the masking fluid on, and I'm going to peel it off. Now, don't worry about the things on the side, the zebra pens and the little pen, the ruler. I put a little flat fan that I put over the top of everything to dry it, so I make sure everything's 100% dry. But anyway, I went ahead and peeled it off, and there may, on the bottom right of that little area, there was a little bit of a tear that came up with it, but I could have grabbed it with my nail because it's right where I actually balled everything together and grabbed it. So I could have scratched it with my nail. Other than that, it came off fine everywhere else. I didn't see that anywhere else. Everything else looked fine. So more testing has to be done. I'm not going to say one way or the other whether you should use this, the masking fluid, or not. With the tape, it was fine. The tape just had a little bit of fuzz on it, was not a big deal. But on the masking fluid end, it could be a problem. I'm not sure. Aren't you glad you came here for answers and I give you nothing? Okay, so what are my final thoughts? First, you're crazy, but go back to the beginning. My head was shaved at the beginning of the video. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're crazy. But here's how I feel about the paper. So I would say for the cold press paper, it's a great paper to have on hand as your backup maybe if you already have a paper that you love and you wanted to have a backup paper to use. This is a great paper to use. It worked exactly the way I wanted it to work. If you want to use it as a primary paper, that's fine too. It's a great paper. It works fine. If you're someone who likes to lift watercolor, if you're someone who likes to put down the hard line and then put a wash over it and not have the color move, I would maybe go with a different one like the Fluid 100. But on this one, it's very comparable with what most people consider good quality watercolor paper for cold press, where it lifts very easily. I didn't see if you can get it all the way back to white. I'll do more tests on these, but I didn't get all the way down to that. I'm just saying for the way that I use it, it's a good secondary paper to have up on my shelf. Now, I was very hard on the hot press watercolor paper. This did terribly. It pilled everywhere, it pulled up, it ripped up layers of paper. It wasn't the best thing to use with the masking fluid and with the tape. You can see it pulled the letters right off of there. Don't worry about that. It's fine. If you don't do that and you do this, it was great. I love how this came out. This is probably one of my favorite ones that I did out of all three of these. I like how it came out. It came out wonderfully, and there's no problem. There's no pilling that happened. The paper was smooth. You could put down the color very nicely. And here's something that I really like about this paper. The biggest benefit of this paper as a hot press paper, I didn't get many harsh lines. If you look all throughout here, all the different colors, look how well those colors blended. There's nothing wrong with that. That's wonderful. Sometimes you get very hard lines and you can't blend the color after that hard line forms. This one, it's very easy to move the color on there. I didn't get the hard lines, so the transition from the watercolor to the white of the page was just as smooth as if I used cold press. You don't find that very often on hot press paper, so that's a huge advantage for this paper. And for that reason, and I noticed this after, which is why I didn't mention it while I was doing the piece, but for that reason, I will get some of this paper and use it just that way. I don't know if I have to say anything about this paper any more than I already have. I love it. I'm getting it. There's nothing bad that I could say about the paper. I didn't use masking fluid on it. I don't care because I don't use masking fluid very often. If I were to put masking fluid on there, could it tear? Could be. There was a little bit more fiber that came up with the tape than with the others. I'm sorry, than with the cold press, not with the other one. But with the cold press, there's a little bit more fibers that came up with it. That doesn't bother me either because it really was not a lot. It was just some fuzz that was on the top. It didn't tear into the paper or pull up layers. I can put watercolor over the top of it. Doesn't splotchy and all that stuff. I did test that. You didn't see that, but I did test that. It didn't do the same thing. So I'll definitely use it. And this is what I'm talking about. There's writing on the back here, so it's very smooth. But if this is the actual back of this kind of paper, that's an extra bonus for me. I can do some regular pen and ink with no worry here, a little bit of pencil on there, and then on this side just go crazy with the watercolor and get that wonderful texture that's in that. I will use this for a landscape paper, most likely. Most of the stuff I'll do is abstract landscape on this, and it's something that I love to do anyway. I don't do a lot on this channel, but I love to do that, and this will be the paper for that. You learned nothing in this video. I'm sorry. You are going to have to go get the paper and try it yourself. I have affiliate links in case you're interested. So thumbs up the video if you're going to go try one of these papers, or maybe just try a new paper. Just go out and buy any paper that you've never tried before and see if it works for you, and use it the way that you would use it. Don't do a bunch of stuff to it that you're not going to have to deal with that you never do anyway. Go ahead and use the paper the way that you use it and see if it works for you. If you would like to join our community, go to illustrationsbypete.com. You can come in, you can put your own artwork on the site and promote it. You can find some inspiration in the free reference photos. You can just use them however you want in your artwork. You do not need to credit me. Or you can come into the forums and talk to some people and maybe give some advice and maybe find a little bit of information that helps you. So come check us out. All right, that's about it for me. I'm going to go. I'll see you in the next one.